Almost exactly 1 year ago on this channel, I posted a video talking about my then new monitors, the Neumann KH310s. I had to buy these on very short notice because my longtime monitors, the Event Opals that I'd had for 12 years to that point, suddenly died on me. It's fair to say that my impressions of the Neumann speakers when I first started using them were fairly lukewarm, to put it kindly, and that came through in that last video. I've now had a full year of sitting with these speakers. I've made innumerable productions with them, I've mixed, I have mastered, I have developed products with my company Submission Audio, so they've most definitely been put through the paces. In this video, we're going to talk about how my relationship with these speakers developed over the last year, and in particular, I'd like to go into the one thing that actually changed quite a bit shortly after I made that video. If you haven't used these speakers before, they are built around a principle called the infinite baffle design. Most speakers are ported. The reason that they're ported is that it makes the low-mid driver far more efficient for a given rating. So that low-mid driver, which is usually tasked with recreating frequencies, let's say all the way from 30 Hz all the way up to hypothetically 500 Hz, works far more efficiently if it's ported. Now, the reason that the speaker cabinet is ported is it allows all the air to come out of the back, it allows the speaker to move far more freely, and that port is tuned to the average kick frequency to boot. That generally means anywhere between about 60 and 80 Hz. The KH310s are not designed like this. There is no port, so it's an infinite baffle, it's just a closed box. This tends to have two effects on the speaker. The first is that it tends to have far more even low end. Less impressive, but far more even, which makes it good for critical production tasks like audio mastering. The negative effect that comes with this, unfortunately, is that it increases the load on that low-mid driver substantially. In the case of the KH310s, this is extremely audible. It presents as a massive increase in the total harmonic distortion, especially across the range that you would characterize as the mid-bass and the low-mid frequencies. As a result, when you use these out of the box by themselves, they essentially sound extremely boxy, extremely closed, extremely stuffy, almost like they have a head cold and their sinuses are congested. So my thought was, why don't I pair these with the KH750 subwoofer that's meant to go with them? So I bought one of those and essentially turned these three-way monitors into a four-way system. Now, this had an effect that was far more transformative than I even expected. What I did was send all the frequencies below 80 Hz to the subwoofer and everything above 80 Hz to the actual speaker boxes. Now, the net effect of this was that it allowed the low-mid driver in the speaker to work in a far more optimal range for what it's voiced for. As a result, not only did I get deeper extension into the sub-lows, but the mid-bass and the low-mid frequencies cleared up so much that the KH310s actually began to sound like a whole new set of speakers. This was not a subtle change. There's nothing remotely subtle about this. In fact, it was so pronounced that I would suggest to you, if you've ever considered grabbing the Neumann KH series of monitors, that it's mandatory to combine them with the subwoofer. The amount of load that's put on the low-mid driver attempting to create those low sub-low frequencies is way too high, and as a result, the clarity across the mid-bass and low-mids suffers substantially. So if you're looking at buying the KH series of monitors, make sure to budget for the subwoofer as well. So what this essentially did was transform the speakers to a point that made them very workable for my purposes. Suddenly they were far more usable for mixing, for mastering, and definitely the production work that I do at Submission Audio as well. However, it didn't make them perfect. They're still the KH series, so they sound very flat, they're very mid-heavy, they're not particularly pleasing to listen to unless you have a particular thing for mid-frequencies. They're not pleasing in that classic hi-fi way that sounds exciting and pumpy and like it's jumping out of the speakers at you. The soundstage is extremely small and focused. It's for one narrow mixing or mastering, probably more mixing position with these speakers, and it's the moment that you deviate out of that sweet spot, it becomes very, very small. On top of this, there's one thing that I don't have any control to mod at this point in time. The lows, the mid-bass, the low mids, and the mids are reasonably good on these speakers, especially the mid-range. They are very good for dealing with the human voice, for mixing broadcast, VO, stuff like this, essentially. However, anything above 5 kHz is a hissy mess, to put it lightly. I'm not sure why they did this, but the tweeters in the KH310s are among some of the worst I've ever heard in pro audio. You can look at them, and you can look at their performance on the manufacturer's own THD spec chart, or graph rather. The total harmonic distortion the moment you get to 5 kHz and above is insane. And compared to the Brillium tweeter from my first run Event Opals, it's not even in the same universe of clarity. It somehow manages to sound closed and boxy, but hissy and indistinct at the same time. So when mixing cymbals, synths, vocal top end, I often have no idea what's going on. I have to reference other records all the time because these tweeters are so bad. Now, I don't know if these are the same tweeter designs from the old 0300s, the Klein and Hummels that I originally heard, the predecessors to these speakers. They don't sound like it to me, but maybe the Event Opals broke me. Maybe the quality of that tweeter has made it difficult to adjust to these slightly more normal sounding ones, but I would warn you that that is probably the single worst and least salvageable aspect of these monitors. Doesn't matter how many subwoofers you add to the array, the tweeters are still going to be the tweeters, so bear that in mind if you're looking at grabbing a pair of these. So, with all that said, I didn't want this to be overly verbose. That is essentially my update from 1 year of having owned these speakers. I think with the subwoofer, they are very, very usable. If you want to keep them long term, I would suggest doing dual subwoofers so you get actual stereo low end. It's a little bit limiting having everything below 80 Hz go straight to the subwoofer. I like doing the crossover at 80 Hz because it allows the mid bass to still be coming out of the speakers at me, and I like having the peak of the bass guitar there, so I can kind of finesse it around the kick, so the kick gets summed to mono essentially beneath 80 Hz, the bass goes out to stereo, and that way I can connect the bass to the rhythm guitar tracks or whatever it is that I might be mixing. So to me, that's the ideal trade-off. I don't like doing the crossover any higher than that, because I think it will suffer as a result. However, if you get the stereo subwoofer array, then you can essentially do whatever you want because you get stereo sublows. For me personally, I'll be hanging on to these while I'm still here in Australia. They'll do for the time being. I don't feel like I'm hampered in any major way. In fact, I've done 2 major, what I would personally consider to be world-class band masters over the last year on these. I actually managed to win those gigs from world-class mastering houses, which is really exciting. So in that sense, I guess they have a decent pedigree for production work if you really apply yourself. However, for me personally, once I eventually relocate, I think for my tastes, I'll probably start to look at something more like the Key 3 monitors. Many of my friends tell me they're good, obviously in a completely different price range to the KH310s and the sub, but I think the 310 design is beginning to show its age. It's beginning to get a little bit long in the tooth, so to speak, because it's been around for a while, and I think the world is ready for something a little bit new, a little bit more focused, and a little bit more advanced in the way that it handles the projection of frequencies and the cancellation of the environment. So, in totality, that has been my experience over the last year with the Neumann KH310 monitors and the KH750 sub. Let me know what your experience has been like in the comments down below, and make sure to ask me any questions down there because I've pretty much said all I have to say about these monitors and probably won't be addressing this topic again, so if you have any questions, I'll aim to answer them down there. Furthermore, I'll be aiming to do far more regular production content on this channel this year, so if you're not subscribed, make sure to do that now so you stay notified, and until the next one, I'll see you later.